Welcome back to PCTR's Generous Justice Study. I'm wondering, has this journey helped you get to know God more? Or a God who is both just and merciful? Has this journey been leading you into prayer, perhaps confession? Has this been helping you really think about how can you respond to everything that you've been learning? I certainly hope so. It's certainly moving in my life in all of those ways and more. And I trust that your conversations with your group have been deep and wide, and that you've been learning with and from one another as you've been walking along together. Last week, our conversation really became a lot more practical and concrete as we started looking at how do we do justice. Particularly, we spent quite a bit of time unpacking the idea of the levels of help that could be offered, from relief to development to social reform. I'm confident that your conversation was talking about different examples to try to really make sure you understood these different levels, but then even you may have started talking about what does it look like in our own area, our own neighborhood, our own community to be moving in ways that pursue justice in terms of relief, in terms of development, and even social reform. This week we moved to chapter 7 called Doing Justice in the Public Square. I found this chapter to be really thought-provoking, challenging, but also helpful to explain why our society is where it is. In this chapter, Keller articulates why so many seem to be, or at least self-identify as committed to doing justice, and yet we don't seem to make progress in many ways. In summary, Keller says it's because there's not a shared definition of justice. That justice means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. He highlights from the work of Harvard law professor Michael Sandel 3 primary views of justice. One that he calls maximizing welfare view. This is a very utilitarian approach to justice, trying to seek the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The second view is the respecting freedom view, where we allow each and every person to determine for themselves what's right and wrong and how they're going to live, and we respect their freedom to live that way. The last view is the promoting virtue view. This is the view that says justice is when people are acting morally and right as they ought to. These views of justice are often irreconcilable. And so when two people hold to two different views of justice and they approach the same situation, they may come to vastly different ideas of what it means to act justly. And so we find ourselves as a society at many different impasses. Keller uses an example from a nonprofit agency to help illustrate this point well. He talks about overhearing a debate between some staff members of a nonprofit agency where they were arguing about who should have the privilege of representing the agency at an upcoming conference. Some believed that it should be the female member of the staff who was the most seniored. Others were proposing that a younger man, though he served for fewer years, be given the privilege because he had an unusually incredible gift for making presentations. He notes how those backing the woman were growing more and more agitated in the midst of the debate, and finally, one of them shouts out, "I'm sorry, but for me, this is a justice issue." That shut down the debate. There were competing values, seniority versus ability, but there were competing views of justice. And that's what really caused the impasse. So how are we as followers of Jesus to navigate our context, our time, our place, our everything? So how are we as followers of Jesus supposed to navigate this with these different views of justice, and even more so when we're told by society to keep our faith out of the conversation. Keller offers this. He says, I propose that Christians' work for justice should be characterized by both humble cooperation and respectful provocation. This call to humility comes from a couple of different places. The first is the caution to us as followers of Jesus to think that we might have a full understanding of justice at every given point, or that we're the only ones that would understand what justice really is. Keller points out the reality of God's common grace. That's this gift given to all of humanity, all created in his image, that he has hidden within each of us. A picture, at least a glimpse of what is good and right and true. In other words, each individual, but also whole societies, have parts of the concept of justice embedded within them as a part of God's design. And so our approach should be one of humility, recognizing that people from a different vantage point might actually, in fact, have a clear picture of justice in that particular moment. This allows for us as followers of Jesus to cooperate with those who may not be. It allows us to be humble enough to work together to seek what is good and right for those who are most vulnerable. And Keller encourages followers of Jesus to engage with respectful provocation. What this means is we would push back against those who hold to a single view of justice, as if that's the only one. Reality is that God's understanding of justice encompasses all of those views, from the maximizing well-being, the respectful freedom, and the promoting virtue. They're all partly right, but they all are incomplete. God's justice encompasses all of them because it comes right from his character. This is a caution to us as followers of Jesus not to get caught up in any one view of justice and hold strictly to that. It's a caution to us to not get co-opted by any particular ideology or party, conservatism, liberalism. None of those have the whole picture of God's justice in view. In fact, Keller says that sometimes Christians will side with one school of thought, other times they'll side with another. As I was thinking about this, I realized how difficult it can be to know which approach, which school of thought to apply to a particular issue. And I realized how much discernment plays a huge part in our doing justice. And so I'm reminded and grateful that we have the Bible and we have the Holy Spirit as these gifts to lead us as we seek to do justice. Another part of the chapter that I resonated with was when Keller once again quoted Michael Sandel, who said, "Justice is inescapably judgmental. It is about the right way to value things." And then Keller added his own thought unpacking that, and he said, "And valuing things is always based on beliefs about the purposes of life, human nature, right and wrong, all of which are moral and religious." I was struck by how everyone claiming to do the work of justice is doing it on a set of underlying assumptions that are always moral and are always have a faith basis of some kind. Since this work of justice is based on moral principles and faith decisions, we as followers of Jesus have so much to offer to this work and to this conversation. The Bible does give us incredible answers about how we value people, why we value them, and how we can go about doing that well. We have so much to offer on the nature of humanity and then what it looks like to work within the reality of the fallen human nature, but also with all of the potential and hope of the people created in the image of God. And so I think one of the challenges that comes out of this chapter, maybe it wasn't explicit, but I find it implicit, is do we feel confident that we have answers to those questions so that when we go out into the world, into the public square to do justice, that we can engage in a way that we have clear answers? strong answers, compelling answers that come right from the heart of God. The strength of these answers that come to us from the Bible, I think, is why Keller then gives this instruction. He says, Christians should identify themselves as believers as they seek justice, welcoming and treating all who work beside them as equals. Believers should let their coworkers know of how the gospel is motivating them. What do you think of that? How does that make you feel? How do you feel about outing yourself as a follower of Jesus among those who may not follow Jesus? Does it feel intimidating? Does it feel overwhelming? Does it feel out of place and it just would be easier to get about doing the work? Or do you see in it the opportunity that I think Keller is inviting us to see? The opportunity to break through the impasses that we have in the understandings of justice. An opportunity to change the types of conversations that are happening around these issues. The opportunity to bring into the light the principles and the ideas and the values of God. And the opportunity to talk to people about the God who loves particularly those who are hurting and vulnerable, the God who gives his son Jesus for reconciliation and for hope today and forevermore.